It was a quiet Tuesday morning in the heart of Brooklyn, and the smell of freshly baked bread wafted through the air. Adanna Okono stood behind the counter of her small but bustling restaurant, Mama Adanna's Kitchen. The place was alive with the clatter of plates, the hum of conversation, and the occasional burst of laughter from her regulars. Adanna had built this restaurant from the ground up, pouring her heart and soul into every dish. It wasn't just a business, it was her home, her dream, and her way of providing for her two children, Ife and Chidi. She had come to the United States 15 years ago, leaving behind her life in Nigeria, with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. She wanted a better future for her children, and worked tirelessly to make it happen. Over the years, her restaurant became a cornerstone of the community. People came not just for the food, but for the warmth and love Adanna poured into every meal. She was known for her jollof rice, her oha soup, and her infectious smile that could brighten even the darkest day. But that morning, as Adanna wiped down the counter and greeted her customers, she noticed a man in a dark suit standing by the door. He looked out of place, holding a folder in his hands and scanning the room as if searching for someone. Her heart sank when their eyes met. She knew deep down this wasn't a customer. The man approached her with a polite but firm expression. "Mrs. Okono?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly. He handed her the folder. "This is for you." Adanna opened it, her eyes scanning the words. It was a deportation notice. A clerical error in her immigration paperwork from years ago had come to light, and now she was being ordered to leave the country within 30 days. Her heart pounded in her chest as the words blurred before her eyes. This couldn't be happening, not after everything she had built, not after all the sacrifices she had made. The man offered a brief, rehearsed apology before turning and walking away, but Adanna barely heard him. She stood frozen, the weight of the notice pressing down on her like a heavy stone. Her mind raced with questions. How could this happen? What would happen to her children, her restaurant, the life she had worked so hard to build? That night, Adanna sat at the kitchen table with her two children, Ife and Chidi. 17-year-old Ife, the more serious and studious of the two, dreamed of becoming a doctor and often helped her mother at the restaurant after school. 15-year-old Chidi, the family's jokester, always knew how to make them laugh even in the hardest times. But tonight, there was no laughter. Adanna explained the situation as calmly as she could, but her voice cracked with emotion. "I have to leave," she said, tears rolling down her cheeks. "But this is our home. This is where you've grown up. I can't leave you." Ife reached across the table and took her mother's hand. "We'll fight this, Mama. We're not going to let them take you away." Chidi nodded, his usual playful demeanor replaced by a rare seriousness. "We'll figure it out. We're a team, right?" Adanna smiled through her tears, deeply grateful for her children's strength, but inside, she was terrified. The clock was ticking, and she had no idea where to begin. The next morning, she turned to her closest friend, Pastor James, a kind, soft-spoken man in his 60s, who had been a pillar of support since her arrival in Brooklyn. His calming presence always made you feel like everything would be okay, even when it wasn't. When Adanna told him about the deportation notice, his face fell. "This is unjust," he said firmly. "You've done so much for this community. We're not going to let this happen." Without hesitation, Pastor James began rallying the community, organizing a meeting at the church that very evening. Word spread fast, and by the time Adanna arrived, the room was packed with loyal customers, neighbors, and friends. Mrs. Rodriguez, who always ordered extra plantains for her grandchildren. Mr. Patel, who came in every Sunday after church for Adanna's famous pepper soup. Even the local mailman, who had delivered letters to her restaurant for years, they were all there. One by one, people stood and shared stories of how Adanna had touched their lives. Mrs. Rodriguez recalled how Adanna had brought hot meals to her family while her husband was in the hospital. Just one of many small kindnesses that had left a lasting impact. Mr. Patel shared how Adanna had once stayed open late so he could grab dinner after a long shift, and the mailman joked about how she always slipped him a free pastry on cold winter mornings. By the end of the night, the room buzzed with determination. Pastor James stood and announced that they would start a petition, write letters of support, and raise money for legal fees. "Adanna is one of us," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction, "and we're not going to let her go without a fight." For the first time since receiving the deportation notice, Adanna felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone. She had a community that loved her and believed in her. But as the days passed, she began to realize that love and support might not be enough. Using the funds raised by her neighbors, Adanna hired an immigration lawyer named Rachel Kimma Sharp, determined woman known for taking on difficult cases. Rachel assured Adanna she would do everything possible to help. But during their first meeting, she uncovered a serious problem, a missing document from Adanna's original visa application. Without it, their case was weak. Rachel explained that the immigration system was harsh and often unforgiving, even when paperwork mistakes weren't the applicant's fault. "I'm not going to lie to you," Rachel said, her voice firm. "The odds are against us. But that doesn't mean we give up. We'll fight this." Adanna nodded, trying to stay strong, but the weight of Rachel's words left her shaken. How could she fight a system that seemed so determined to tear her life apart? That weekend, as she and her children sorted through old boxes and documents in hopes of finding anything useful, Ife stumbled upon something unexpected: a yellowed newspaper clipping from 2012. The headline read, "Local chef feeds hundreds during crisis." The article detailed how Adanna had turned her restaurant into a makeshift relief center during Hurricane Sandy, cooking meals for stranded families, delivering food to elderly neighbors, and even helping rescue a woman trapped in a flooded apartment. A photo showed Adanna in her kitchen, weary but resolute, ladling steaming soup into bowls. "Mama, this is it," Ife said, eyes wide. "This proves how much you've done for this community. We can use this." Adanna's heart swelled with pride. She had nearly forgotten that time, too focused on survival and moving forward. But now, the article felt like a lifeline. Together with Rachel, they submitted the newspaper clipping, along with testimonies from those Adanna had helped during the storm, to the immigration office. But their hopes were quickly dashed. The office dismissed the evidence as irrelevant to her legal status. It didn't matter how much Adanna had given to her community. What mattered, in the eyes of the system, was a single missing document. Rachel was furious. "This is bureaucracy at its worst," she said. "They're ignoring the human side of this case." Adanna felt the hope she'd been clinging to start slipping away, but she refused to give up. She had come too far to let a piece of paper erase everything she had built. Then, just as she was trying to regroup, another blow came, this time from a rival restaurant owner, Mr. Thompson, who had long been envious of her success. He began spreading rumors that Adanna was operating illegally and mistreating her staff. The gossip reached the health department, and one morning, inspectors arrived unannounced. Though they found only minor violations, it was enough to force a temporary closure of the restaurant. It was a crushing setback. Without her restaurant, Adanna lost her only source of income, leaving her unable to pay legal fees or support her children. With each passing day, the pressure grew. The once warm and lively kitchen was now silent, the tables empty, and the lights off. The place that had been her sanctuary now felt like a hollow shell. Her savings dwindled quickly, and she was forced to make painful choices, cutting back on groceries, skipping utility payments, and even considering selling the restaurant to fund her legal battle. Her children noticed the strain. Ife, ever the responsible one, took on extra chores and tried managing the household budget. Chidi, though young, wanted to help too. One evening, Adanna came home from a meeting with Rachel to find Chidi nervously sitting at the kitchen table. "Mama," he said hesitantly, "I got a part-time job." Adanna froze. "Chidi, you're supposed to be focusing on school." "I know," he said quickly. But I want to help. I can't just sit here while you struggle. I'll work after school and on weekends. It's not a big deal. Adanna's heart ached. She knew he meant well, but the thought of her son sacrificing his education for her was unbearable. Chidi, she said gently, sitting beside him, I appreciate this more than you know. But your job is to study to build the future I came here to give you, though the disappointment was clear. That's the weight of that reality lingered. Desperate for a breakthrough, one of Adanna's younger customers, a college student named Mia, suggested starting a social media campaign. People need to hear your story, Mia urged. If we can get enough attention, maybe someone with influence will step in. Adanna was hesitant at first. She wasn't comfortable exposing her private struggles to the world, but with time running out, she agreed. Mia created a heartfelt video featuring clips of Adanna cooking, customer testimonials, and a sincere plea for help. They posted it with the hashtag. For a moment, there was hope. The video was picked up by a few local influencers, and her regulars shared it as widely as they could. But, the campaign never gained the traction they had hoped for. The internet, it seemed, was overflowing with other stories, other causes, other crises, and Adanna's struggle was just one more voice lost in the noise. It didn't stand out enough to go viral. When Mia showed her the campaign's underwhelming results, Adanna tried to mask her disappointment. You did your best, she said, forcing a smile. That's all anyone can do. But deep down, a wave of hopelessness crept in. It felt like the world had silently decided that her story simply didn't matter. Then, just when Adanna thought every possible avenue had been exhausted, hope arrived in an unexpected form. One quiet afternoon, while she was cleaning her resta, trying to stay busy, she barely noticed a knock at the door. Opening it, she found an older man with a gentle face. He introduced himself as Robert Hayes, a retired FEMA worker. I don't know if you remember me, he said, but I remember you. Adanna blinked, trying to place him. I'm sorry, I don't. Robert smiled warmly. It was during Hurricane Sandy. I was coordinating relief efforts in this neighborhood, and I remember your restaurant too. We're cooking for people, delivering meals to shelters, even helping us organize supplies. You didn't have to, but you did. As the memory resurfaced, Adanna's eyes widened. Oh my goodness, she whispered, her voice shaking. I do remember. Robert nodded. When I heard about what you're going through, I knew I had to come forward. I still have FEMA records showing that your restaurant functioned as an unofficial relief center. I can testify to that and provide the documentation. For the first time in weeks, Adanna felt genuine hope break through the despair. Thank you, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. Thank you so much. Robert gently placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You don't deserve this, Adanna. You've given so much to this community. It's time someone stood up for you. With Robert's testimony and the FEMA records in hand, Rachel filed a new appeal. But just as they began preparing the next legal step, Rachel discovered something troubling. The immigration officer assigned to Adanna's case, Gerald Whitman, had a documented history of denying appeals from immigrants over minor paperwork errors. Multiple complaints had been filed against him over the years, alleging misconduct and bias. Armed with this new information, Rachel submitted a formal complaint against Whitman, citing his pattern of unfair treatment and potential prejudice. But the complaint only served to delay the case further. Whitman, it seemed, was untouchable, protected by a system built to shield officials like him. Adanna felt time slipping away with every delay, bringing her closer to deportation. The constant stress began to take a toll on her health. Still, Rachel refused to back down. We're not going to let one corrupt official decide your fate, she said firmly. We'll keep fighting. As news of Whitman's misconduct spread, Adanna's community took action. Pastor James organized a peaceful protest outside the immigration office, demanding justice for Adanna. Dozens gathered, holding signs that read, Save Mama Adanna, and justice for immigrants. They chanted, sang, and shared heartfelt stories about the impact Adanna had made on their lives. The protest caught the attention of a local news station, and a reporter interviewed Adanna on camera. "I just want to stay with my children," she said, her voice trembling. "This is our home. This is where we belong." The protest brought renewed hope, but it also attracted criticism. Some accused Adanna of seeking attention. Others defended the immigration system as simply doing its job. The backlash hurt, but Adanna focused on the overwhelming support that continued to pour in. In the midst of the chaos, she received an unexpected phone call from her estranged brother, Emeka, who still lived in Nigeria. They hadn't spoken in years, not since a bitter falling out over their father's estate. "Adanna," he said, hesitantly, "I know we haven't been on the best of terms, but I want to help." Adanna was wary. "How?" she asked, guarded. "Our father had powerful connections," Emeka explained. "He was close friends with a Nigerian diplomat who now works with the United Nations. I think he might be able to help." Adanna was stunned. She had always known her father had influence, but never imagined using it for herself. "I don't know, Emeka," she said. "I don't want to drag the family into this." But Emeka insisted. "This is your life and your children's future. Let me try." After a long pause, Adanna agreed. Days later, the diplomat sent a letter of support, vouching for Adanna's character and contributions. It wasn't a solution, but it was another crucial piece of her defense. Then, one evening, the weight of everything became too much. While cleaning the empty restaurant, Adanna began to feel lightheaded. She ignored it, pushing through the fatigue until her vision blurred and she collapsed. When she woke up in a hospital bed, Ife and Chidi were at her side. Ife held her mother's hand tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mama, you scared us," she whispered. "You have to take care of yourself." The doctor explained that Adanna's collapse was caused by extreme exhaustion and stress. "You can't keep putting your body through this," the doctor said firmly, glancing at Adanna's chart. "You're under too much pressure, and it's taking a serious toll." Adanna nodded weakly, but her thoughts remained fixed on the fight ahead. Seeing her like this, Ife and Chidi insisted on taking over the restaurant temporarily, determined to keep their mother's dream alive. Watching her children step up filled Adanna with both pride and guilt. She had always been the one protecting them, and now they were the ones protecting her. The hospital room was quiet, broken only by the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Adanna lay pale and exhausted, her once unshakable strength drained. She had always carried the weight of the world on her shoulders without complaint. But now, looking at her children sitting beside her bed, she saw how deeply the stress had worn her down. Ife sat closest, clutching her hand, her red, puffy eyes full of worry. Chidi sat silently in the corner, fists clenched, his usual playful spirit replaced with a heavy stillness. "Mama," he said softly, his voice trembling, "you can't keep doing this to yourself. You always take care of everyone else, but you never let anyone take care of you." Adanna tried to smile, but it was weak. "I'm fine, my dear. I just need a little rest." "No, Mama," Chidi said suddenly, his voice louder than he intended as he stood and walked to her bedside, emotion flashing in his eyes. "You're not fine. You've been pushing too hard, and now look, you collapsed." You could have his voice cracked, and he turned away, unable to finish. Adanna's heart ached as she watched her son struggle to hold back tears. She had tried so hard to shield them from pain, but now they saw it, all the fear, the exhaustion, the weight she had carried alone. Reaching out, she placed a trembling hand on Chidi's arm. "I never wanted you to see me like this. I just couldn't give up, not on this fight, not on you." Chidi knelt beside her bed, resting his head on her arm. "We're not asking you to give up, Mama. We just want you to take care of yourself. We'll fight this together, but not if you break yourself trying to do it alone." A few moments later, the doctor returned. You need real rest, he said gently. If you keep going like this, you'll end up back here or worse. Adanna nodded again, the reality sinking in. Slowing down felt impossible. How could she rest when so much was at stake? But looking at her children, she knew she had no choice. If she wanted to keep fighting, she had to take care of herself first. Over the following days, Ife and Chidi took over the restaurant. They weren't seasoned chefs, but they had their mother's recipes and her resilience. Ife handled the kitchen with steady hands and careful attention, while Chidi managed the front of house, greeting customers and taking orders. The community stepped up too. Mrs. Rodriguez brought groceries. Mr. Patel volunteered to wash dishes, and Pastor James organized a rotating schedule of volunteers to keep the place running. Adanna watched from the sidelines, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. Her children had grown into young leaders, and her community continued to show up for her in ways she never expected. But even as she rested, the looming threat of deportation hovered like a storm cloud. Time was running out, and she knew the fight wasn't over. Then, one evening, as Ife and Chidi were cleaning the restaurant after closing, Chidi stumbled upon an old, dust-covered box tucked away in a forgotten corner of the storage room. The box was worn and frayed, clearly untouched for years. Hey, Ife, Chidi called, dragging it into the kitchen. Look what I found. Ife wiped her hands on a towel and walked over, peering curiously inside. The box was filled with old receipts, invoices, and documents from the early days of the restaurant. Where did you find this? Ife asked. In the back, Chidi replied, pulling out a stack of papers. I think it's from when Mama first opened the place. They began sifting through the pile, hoping to find anything that might help. Most of it was mundane, supply orders, tax forms, and handwritten notes. But then, buried at the bottom, Ife's fingers landed on something that made her heart skip a beat: a faded receipt from a government office. Dated over a decade ago, it showed proof of submission for a document that matched the one missing in Adanna's immigration file. Ife's hands trembled as she held it. Chidi, she whispered, this could be it. This could prove Mama submitted the paperwork. Years ago, Chidi leaned in, eyes wide. Do you think it'll help? It has to, she said, her voice brimming with hope. The next morning, they rushed the receipt to Rachel, who examined it closely. This is exactly what we needed, she said, her tone energized. If we can authenticate this, it shows the missing document wasn't your mother's fault, it was the government's error. For the first time in weeks, Adanna felt genuine hope rise within her, though she braced herself against possible disappointment. Rachel quickly submitted the receipt as new evidence and continued researching possible legal angles. In doing so, she discovered a little-known provision in immigration law, a rule that granted leniency to individuals who had made significant contributions during national emergencies. Though rarely used, Rachel believed Adanna's case fit the criteria supported by FEMA records, the community's testimonies, and now, the long-lost receipt. If we can argue that your work during Hurricane Sandy qualifies under this rule, we might have a chance, Rachel explained during their next meeting. Do you really think it could work? Adanna asked, her voice cautious but hopeful. It's a long shot, Rachel admitted, but it's a shot worth taking. The new appeal was filed, and once again, they waited. Adanna kept herself busy helping Ife and Chidi at the restaurant when she could, leaning on the community for strength, but the uncertainty weighed on her like a heavy stone. Then, weeks later, momentum returned from an unexpected source. Sarah Bennett, a local journalist who had once interviewed Adanna during Hurricane Sandy, learned about her case and decided to write a feature story, titled, A Mother's Fight. The woman who fed a community now faces deportation. The article captured Adanna's journey, her selfless contributions during the storm, her role as a mother and business owner, and her ongoing legal battle. It was raw, emotional, and powerfully human, Readers were moved. The story went viral on social media, and Adanna's case was suddenly being discussed far beyond Brooklyn. Local news stations picked it up, and soon Adanna was invited to speak on a morning talk show. Nervous, but determined, she sat down before the cameras, her hands shaking, heart pounding, and encouraged by Rachel, spoke her truth with courage and clarity. "I came to this country with nothing but a dream," Adanna said during the interview, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I've worked hard to build a life for my children, to give them opportunities I never had. This community has become my family, and I've done everything I can to give back. All I want is the chance to stay and continue building the life we've started here." Her words struck a powerful chord with viewers. The hashtag #SaveMama began trending across social media, and for the first time, it felt like the tide might be turning. But despite the overwhelming support, Adanna knew the final decision rested in the hands of the immigration court. Then, the story caught the attention of City Council member Marcus Rita, longtime regular at Adanna's restaurant, and a passionate advocate for immigrant communities. Deeply moved, Marcus contacted Rachel and offered his full support. "Adanna has been a pillar of this neighborhood," he said. "I've seen firsthand how much she's done for the people here. I'll do whatever I can to help." He penned a powerful letter to the immigration office, vouching for her character and contributions, and even reached out to a state senator to amplify the case. While the process remained slow, Marcus's involvement gave the case added weight and legitimacy. Adanna was deeply touched. "I never imagined someone like him would fight for me," she told Rachel, her voice laced with cautious hope. Still, uncertainty loomed. Adanna knew better than to let hope turn into expectation. And then, just as things seemed to be shifting in her favor, the devastating news arrived. Her appeal had been officially denied, and a final deportation date had been set. The letter came on a gray, rainy afternoon. As Adanna read the cold, clinical words, her hands began to tremble. "No," she whispered, the sound barely escaping her lips. "This can't be happening." Ife and Chidi were home when she broke. The news stare spilled from Ife's eyes instantly, while Chidi sat in stunned silence, his face pale. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice shaking. For the first time, Adanna had no answer. That night, she sat alone in the quiet of the restaurant, staring at the empty tables. 15 years of memories rushed over her: laughter, celebrations, shared meals with friends and strangers alike. This restaurant wasn't just a business, it was her life, her legacy, and now it was slipping through her fingers. But even in her despair, a small voice inside her refused to surrender. This wasn't over. Not yet. There had to be another way, some way to keep her family together. She just had to find it. The days that followed were some of the darkest she had ever known. The final deportation date loomed like a storm cloud, and though she tried to stay strong for her children, the emotional weight was. Night after night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how to say goodbye to her life, to her community, and most heartbreakingly, to her children. But fate, it seemed, wasn't finished with her yet. One quiet evening, as the restaurant was closing, Chidu had stayed behind to clean, came bursting into the living room, breathless and flushed, waving a paper in his hand. "Mama! Mama! Look at this!" he cried, his voice full of urgency and something else, hope. Adanna sat up from the couch, startled, as Chidi burst into the room, waving a piece of paper in the air. "Chidi, what is it?" she asked, concern and curiosity lacing her voice. Breathless and trembling with excitement, he handed her the paper. It was the old receipt they had discovered weeks ago, the one that proved she had submitted the missing immigration document years earlier. But this time, Chidi had noticed something they'd missed. At the bottom, in faint, nearly illegible handwriting, was a handwritten note from the government office acknowledging Receipt of the document dated and signed by an official, Adanna. Heart skipped a beat. This proves it, she whispered, her voice shaking. It wasn't my fault. They had it. It was their mistake. Ife, who had been listening from the kitchen, rushed over. Mama, we have to show this to Rachel right away, she said urgently. The next morning, the family met with Rachel, who examined the note with cautious optimism. This is it, Rachel said firmly. This could be the key to reopening your case. She wasted no time, filing an emergency request to the immigration office and submitting the newly discovered evidence. The wait was excruciating, the final deportation date just days away. Then, on the eve of Adanna's scheduled removal, Rachel burst through the restaurant doors, eyes shining. Adanna, she said, breathless, they verified the receipt. Your case has been reopened, and you've been granted a temporary stay while the new evidence is reviewed. Adanna's knees buckled with relief. Does this mean? She began, but Rachel gently interrupted. It means we have a chance. It's not over yet. For the first time in weeks, Adanna allowed herself to feel hope. The day of the final hearing arrived. Adanna walked into the courtroom with her head held high, flanked by her children, Rachel, and a small but steadfast group of community supporters, Pastor James, Mrs. Rodriguez, Robert Hayes, and others. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, listened intently as Rachel presented the evidence, the validated receipt confirming submission of the missing document, FEMA records showing how Adanna's restaurant served as an unofficial relief center during Hurricane Sandy, and Robert Hayes' testimony detailing her selfless work during the crisis. One by one, members of the community spoke. Mrs. Rodriguez recalled how Adanna had provided food when her husband was hospitalized. Mr. Patel spoke of the warmth and refuge her restaurant offered. Councilman Marcus Reed submitted a formal letter, attesting to her impact on the neighborhood. Then Rachel referenced the rarely used clause in immigration law, granting leniency to individuals who had made vital contributions during national emergencies. Your Honor, she said, her voice steady. Adanna Okono is more than an immigrant. She's a mother, a business owner, and a cornerstone of her community. It would be a grave injustice to tear her away from the life she's built here. The judge was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she turned to Adanna. Mrs. Okono, she said, her tone firm, but not unkind, do you have anything to say before I render my decision? Adanna stood slowly, hands clasped in front of her. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. Your Honor, I came to this country with nothing but a dream. I've worked hard every day to give my children the life I never had. This community is my home. All I ask is the chance to stay and continue building what we've started. Hush fell over the courtroom as the judge considered her words. Then, at last, she spoke, after reviewing the evidence and hearing the testimonies. I find that Mrs. Okono has made significant contributions to her community and this country. The missing document was not her fault, and it would be unjust to penalize her for a error. Therefore, I am granting Mrs. Okono permanent residency. The courtroom erupted in cheers as Adanna's supporters rushed to embrace her, tears of joy streaming down their faces. Ife and Chidi clung tightly to their mother, overwhelmed with relief. Adanna herself was flooded with emotion, gratitude, disbelief, and the profound weight of victory. The fight was over, and she had won. In the weeks that followed, her world transformed into a whirlwind of celebration and renewal. Mama Adanna's kitchen reopened, and the community poured in with overwhelming support. The tables were packed, the kitchen buzzed with life, and the air was filled with laughter, conversation, and the scent of her famous jollof rice. Her story, once nearly lost to bureaucratic silence, became a beacon of hope and resilience. Visitors came not just for the food, but to meet the woman who had refused to give up. But Adanna didn't stop. There she knew her case was one of many. Determined to give back, she began working with local advocacy groups, sharing her story and raising awareness about the immigrant experience. She spoke at rallies, attended community meetings, and even started a scholarship fund for young immigrants chasing their dreams. Inspired by her journey, her children found new strength. Ife still focused on becoming a doctor, studied with renewed purpose, while Chidi began volunteering with a nonprofit that helped immigrant families navigate the legal system. One quiet evening, as Adanna stirred a pot of jollof rice in her kitchen, she looked out over the restaurant. Customers chatted at every table. Her children laughed with regulars, and the walls around her were now lined with photos and newspaper clippings that told the story of her fight and triumph. This place wasn't just a restaurant, it was her home, her dream realized. Adanna smiled, her heart full. She had fought for her family, for her future, and for her place in the world, and she had won. But even more than that, she had discovered her voice, her power, and the unwavering truth that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have a beautiful day, and we'll see you in the next video.